Chapter 0 The Old Way.
"Must we run every morning?" the older wolf grumbled as his large eyes slowly opened. His brother had shook him awake with a large grin on his face. His smile of fangs was about the only thing that showed through the dark. He didn't answer him as he had heard the question a million times. "Come on," he said. They both crept out of the cave they had been sleeping in, and as Bourdon and Langston walked out into the early morning air, Langston breathed deep. "This is why," Bourdon said as they looked out over the peaceful woods, the day getting ready to burst over the mountains and flood the valley with light. It had been their home for many generations, far from the civilizations of humans. Bourdon and Langston were not actually brothers. They were, however, according to the pack, and as Langston was so fond of growl, "The pack is all that matters." Langston stood and stretched his back. "Stop wasting time, brother." And he jumped off the perch of rock they were on. Bourdon cocked his head and was about to retort about being the one to get him up. However, it was no use. Langston was already in full run. "Bird dropping," he rumbled from his throat, and launched into the air, his paws hitting pine needles and dirt as he ran after him. It took only a moment for Bourdon to catch up and run alongside him. They whipped through the forest. "Sometimes, Langston, you're a real ass," Bourdon growled. "Don't say such things to your pack leader," he retorted. Bourdon snuffled. He did not like being berated, and it seemed that Langston was beginning to do it more and more often. Bourdon pulled in his emotions. He kept calm. Their father had died 7 moons ago, and Langston had been next in succession. He did well leading and kept everyone safe and hidden, but the power had changed him. As of late, Bourdon had become more and more the target Langston had chose to exert his new power on. Bourdon had always been outspoken, but it had never bothered Langston before. But now things were different. As if Langston was worried Bourdon would challenge him for power. But even the idea of that seemed strange. Bourdon had no want to tell anyone what to do. He had no interest in leading anything. A river approached as they ran. Langston used all 4 of his feet and all his effort to launch himself and almost cleared the river, only his rear paws getting wet. Bourdon, on the other hand, had come up with a better way. He jumped onto the large tree and from his higher platform jumped easily over the river. Langston had seen Bourdon's leap, and anger started to boil in him. They ran. "Why must you do that?" Langston asked, a dark tone in his voice. "What do you mean?" Bourdon asked. "Always trying to figure out a better way to do things," Langston growled back. Apparent now he was in no mood for joking. "I don't know. Why does it matter? You're the one with wet feet," Bourdon egged on. He knew he shouldn't have done it, but he couldn't resist. He looked over to Langston and tried to give a smile. It was met with no more than a sneer. "It is dangerous for the pack," Langston said. "What?" Bourdon asked, now a little confused and angry about being called out. "How would that be dangerous?" "You could bring on change," Langston explained. "So, a little change would be good for the pack," Bourdon said. "What?" Langston howled. "The way of the pack is all we have. You will not change that." "Change has nothing to do with the pack. We are bound by family. The way we do things has little to do with it," Bourdon replied. "Don't speak to me like that," Langston snarls. "You will not bring change to our way." They ran. Langston lost in the abandon of pushing his body through his paces. Bourdon, however, felt dejected, angry, and small. He wanted to lash out at his brother. There was no reason for this outburst toward him. He wanted to say more and fight for his ideals, but he knew it would do little good. Langston was as locked into rules and tradition as any wolf could be. Bourdon had never wanted the power of pack leader. However, he did worry that his brother would not be a very fair leader. He held his tongue and continued to run. He was careful not to overtake him. although he could have done so easily. He was not allowed ever to pass the pack leader by pack law. It was rules such as these that drove Bourdon to the brink of rebellion. It was not that he didn't respect the laws, just that some of them seemed mundane and stupid, based more on instinct than actual logic. They skirted through the woods at top speed for over an hour. Bourdon could have gone on forever, but he followed as their run came to an end. Bourdon had always pushed his body and himself. He spent entire days climbing one section of rock or attempting a leap over and over until he got it right. The other wolves ran, but Bourdon lived for bettering his physical ability. Not that he did it to be strong or superior to anyone. He did it to push his own limits, not only his body but his mind as well. He had become adept at coming up with alternative ways to making leaps or climbs, which opened to him the school of thought that he should look at everything from all angles. He started coming up with better ways to do things. Everything he looked at, he thought of ways to improve. However, even before Langston had taken charge, it was not looked on as a good thing. When he was younger, he used to tell the other wolves of his ideas. However, it always fell on deaf ears, or more so, ears that did not dare to listen. Although many of the wolves in the pack looked at Bourdon with amazement at the things he could accomplish, but he also frightened them. Bourdon could even be found in the woods, by himself, practicing a form of meditation, centering himself with the earth. He was truly a wolf, like none of the others there. They slowed to a walk as they came into the area where the pack was camped out. They were greeted by smiles and good mornings. There were about 20 wolves in the pack. They had all floated into the woods when they had begun to feel the change, while in their conversion, most of them had been found and brought to the camp. Werewolves start out as people, that's true enough, and in their teenage years they will naturally float away from their human life. At 19 they will make their conversion. None of them really knew what caused them to come about, but they did know it was very rare, and seemed to have no rhyme or reason. As humans, wolves usually keep much to themselves, never feeling quite right about being around other people. Then, as they would come closer to the conversion, they would draw away from civilizations. Some would live out their time alone. Some would wind up with a pack of other werewolves. The legends say that a werewolf can turn back and forth. Bourdon had never heard of a wolf that could do this. The wolves avoided humans like the plague. Their father used to tell them stories about a great werewolf community that was wiped off the earth by the humans. But, as with many things, Bourdon had begun to question these stories. He had even hiked to the outskirts of the forest and looked into the small town of humans. He was more curious than anything. They walked over to Langston's cave and his packmate, Rayan. She gave Langston a small, respectful smile. Then she looked at Bourdon and gave him a large smile. He breathed heavy and smiled around his panting tongue. She could not help but let a small laugh escape her. "That's your problem, brother," Langston smiled. "You never look like you take anything seriously," he growled. Bourdon nodded. "That's because I don't," Bourdon replied, with a smile still plastered on his face. Langston shook his head at his brother. "I'm off to the river," Langston said, and walked off into the woods. It was a rule that Bourdon would have to wait to bathe until after Langston had finished. Another stupid rule. Before he had become the pack leader, they had bathed together. Bourdon looked after his brother. Although he had to admit, this particular rule he did not mind, because it gave him a small amount of time to be with Rayan. It would be obvious to most that they held a place in their hearts for each other. But she had been given to Langston by their father. Bourdon shook at the thought. The idea of someone having ownership over another wolf seemed barbaric to him. One of the main reasons that Bourdon questioned the laws of the pack so deeply were rules and ideals like this. There were many concepts that seemed wrong at the base of all their rules. Deep in his soul, Bourdon always secretly hoped that one day the pack would see the light and rebuild their ideals from the ground up. Rayan and Bourdon spoke for a while, Bourdon leaning back and looking at the treetops and the sky beyond. He reveled in the sun warming his dark fur. Bourdon stood about 7 feet at full height. He had dark fur with only a few small patches of gray throughout. His eyes were a stunning blue. "You hurt your arm," Rayan said, and he felt her healing paws lift his arm into the light. "Let me patch that for you." She put on some sticky gel over the cut. "You push yourself too hard," she said, looking up from her work into his eyes. Her heart skipped a beat. He dazzled her, as he had done every morning for the 10 years she had been with the pack. But she was not his. She belonged to Langston. She pushed the thoughts away. No matter the feelings, the law said different. "Thank you," he growled. They had slowly closed into each other and were now only a few inches from each other. The air was electric as the years of unknown passion washed over them. Their eyes locked in a silent conversation of forbidden love. There were so many things that she wanted to say to him. She was desperate to feel him nuzzle against her. She pushed the thought away again, this time even harder, getting angry with herself for even thinking of something so impossible. They turned away from each other, both coming to the same conclusion they came to every morning. There was no way to make it happen. The laws of the pack would never allow it. Both Bourdon and Rayan had shared the daydream of sneaking away together and building a life, although of course they had never shared it with each other. However, today the damage had already been done. Langston had been walking back when he seen them talking. He saw how close they were, and the anger blew up in him like a bomb. He knew in his heart that Rayan had always wanted to be with Bourdon. It was not that difficult to see, and that is what angered him. He was the pack leader, and Bourdon gave him the least respect. He used to think he could handle having Bourdon with them, but it started to become clear. He knew it was time to take drastic action. His anger boiled, but he put it aside for now and walked up to the two. They smiled at him, and then Bourdon got up. "My turn to get in the river," Bourdon said and walked off. Langston's eyes followed him until he was out of sight. He had debated for months now, but he could no longer hold his anger in check. Bourdon had become a danger. Whether he was a danger to the pack or just to Langston himself was still in debate. Langston's anger would no longer be quelled. He sighed. Soon Bourdon would no longer be a problem for him or the pack. He thought of the plan many times before, but in the past it had seemed like something he could not do. Deep inside, he was still torn. All for the good of the pack, he thought to himself. But even he didn't know if he believed it.